The Nets said this is a big game to us. They just weren't mincing any words. Kevin Lockery said, we're growing up in the same environment with the Knicks. We need this game. It's important to us. And you can believe it now, the way they came back.
It's shown. It's been a very gutty performance by both teams. I think I would have to give the edge to the Nets as far as the hustle is concerned, because they fought and rallied back, and they're still in this basketball game.
All right, now Phil Jackson is coming in for the first time for New York. Howard Porter is checking in for the Nets. Have King, Jackson, Porter, George Johnson, Beard, Monroe, Jackson, McAdoo, and Lonnie Shelton.
There goes Jackson. He's a defensive specialist. He's going to put all the pressure in the world he can on Kevin Porter. Jackson has tremendous long arm. He's an excellent defense.
That's a good move. I like that. Right. All right, 1 second. We're going to get a shot. Williamson's shot. It's good. It's good.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it. 43 points falling out of bounds.
Williamson's got it away. And the Nets have won it.
Hell of a game.
112 to 110. Let's look at it again, Gus.
Man's playing him right here. He throws the ball down. Jackson does a super job on the defense. Williamson's in the three-point area, fades back, falling out of bounds, throws a 40, 30-footer in, hits nothing but the net. They deserve the win.
All right, I waited to the last to vote on my MVP. I got to give it to Williamson. No question. I'm glad we did wait. So the Chevrolet Most Valuable Player Award goes to John Williamson. 43 points in the winning basket here this afternoon. The Chevrolet 1000 scholarship will be awarded to New Mexico State. John Williamson's school, on behalf of John, 112 to 110. Quite an afternoon for the New York Knicks. So the New Jersey Nets defeat the New York Knicks 112 to 110. Stay tuned as the NBA on CBS continues after this word from your local station.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, that's Super John Williamson to you, fine sir. How are you, everybody? My name's Tim Hanlon. Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. I appreciate you finding us, however you've done so, downloading us and streaming or however you're ingesting this week's proceedings. Welcome, and welcome. A topic that has been long overdue in Good Seats Still Available history for sure. Yours truly, having grown up in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, as you well know from previous episodes, and the New Jersey version of the Nets is the topic du jour. Our guest this week, Łukasz Muniowski. Very difficult name for yours truly to pronounce, but hopefully I've not mangled the Polish pronunciation, is our guest this week, the author of the just released new McFarland book called Turnpike Team, A History of the New Jersey Nets. And the Brooklyn Nets, we know today, of course, having a season thus far as we record this in early January 2023. One of the top 3 or 4 teams by record thus far. And perhaps this is the year that the Nets franchise breaks through and gets back to the finals and perhaps maybe climbs the summit for the first time in their life in the NBA. We all know the original Nets, the New York Nets, in 1974 and in the ABA's final season in 1976, won 2 ABA championships, mostly, and not mostly, but certainly very solidly off the back and the fingertips, and the airborne greatness of one Dr. Julius Erving, Dr. J. But this is a very interesting franchise, these Brooklyn Nets. Before they moved to Brooklyn and became the Brooklyn Nets in 2012, they were all over the place. They began life as the New Jersey Americans, playing in the Teaneck Armory and other places in the original ABA's formation. They moved to Long Island and Comac Arena and a couple of other places, and then they finally domiciled themselves in what was then the brand new Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum, and until they left and were one of the successful franchises to merge, announced in 1976, into the NBA. And the first season, 1976-77, no, my mistake, the 77, no, wait a minute. This is hard. This is why we're doing this episode. 76-77 was their first year as the NBA version of the Nets, but they were still the New York Nets. They were still playing in the Nassau Coliseum, and they moved firmly to New Jersey for sure for the 77-78 season. And they were on their way to eventually the Brendan Byrne / Meadowlands Arena, but not for 4 years prior, their first 4 years in New Jersey, playing in the RAC, the Rutgers Athletic Center. It is now branded and rehabbed and refurbished and stuff. But for those 4 magical years, they were the first real years of the New Jersey Nets NBA version of themselves. And that clip that you heard there at the outset of today's proceedings gives you a bit of a taste. We searched very, very hard for a John Sterling and Mike DiTommaso called game. I guess it was on WMCA, then it was on WVNJ, and the John Sterling, our guest from episode number 100, was the longtime voice of the peripatetic Nets in their Long Island years, and for a bunch of years in New Jersey, the gutty gritty New Jersey Nets, he would call them. And he would go off, and this game, apparently he just went nuts, as did Gary Bender and Gus Johnson on the CBS call of the game. This is in, February 12th, 1978 on CBS. But the radio version, I can assure you, was a whole lot more animated than Messrs. Bender and Johnson were calling this game. You have to remember that John Sterling would call these games, and he wouldn't even call them by their players' names. He would just say Bernard Sky, B.B. King. He would call Jan Van Bredikov VBK, Super John Williamson. They would have all these great nicknames and stuff, and it was an exciting team to listen to if you couldn't even see them. These gutty gritty New Jersey Nets. But that's where that clip was from. And that was from their first season as the New Jersey Nets of the NBA, and their second season as an NBA team after having been in the ABA. Hopefully you can follow all that. But that was a rare victory, and importantly against the New York Knicks, who, as we'll hear in this conversation with Łukasz coming up, were an important background of the New Jersey Nets story, because the Knicks were, very protective of their territorial rights. And as the ABA merged with the NBA, the Knicks were not, let's say, the most accommodating neighbor, shall we say. But the rivalry did sort of percolate for sure. It's hard to say now what you call the Brooklyn and Nets and the New York Knicks sort of rivalry now, but it was pretty edgy, the New Jersey Nets version versus the Knicks, and some wild games for sure, and that was definitely one of them. But the whole history of the Nets franchise is fascinating, and we're going to focus on the New Jersey version of that, the incarnation of the New Jersey version. And of course, not just the Rutgers Athletic Center, but the Meadowlands Arena or Brendan Byrne Arena. There were a couple of years there near the end before they moved to Brooklyn, where they played in the Prudential Center in Newark until finally moving in 2012 to the Barclays Center. Lots of great stories. If you remember names like not only Dr. J, but Buck Williams and Sam Bowie and Derek Coleman, Stephon Marbury, Vince Carter, Jason Kidd, all of that and more, as well as the aforementioned Super John Williamson, and just a whole litany of players that came and went. The New Jersey Nets, a fascinating story, never sort of a great team, save for two wonderfully memorable years where we're defying all odds. The New Jersey Nets were in the finals of the NBA Finals for the 2001-2002 season and the following 2002-2003 season. They could never sort of climb the summit. But those are the last two finals appearances, and we get into a whole bunch of stuff. It's also a lot about New Jersey. Not quite New York, not quite Philadelphia, in the middle, in between, not quite either of those things. The malaise of being from and in New Jersey. The sort of second fiddle, shall we say, or even in the case of the NHL, third fiddle, when you have three franchises in the New York metropolitan area. All of these things, we kind of get into, the also-ran status of being a New Jersey franchise and the Nets in particular, and why perhaps Łukasz and myself identified so tightly with the New Jersey version of the Nets. The part of our conversation this week devoted to that this week. It's been a day. You can hear my the head cold that I have in my head as we talk about the New Jersey Nets. Łukasz Muniowski coming up in just a moment's time. We're going to dispense again with the promotion just to get right to the conversation. Again, you can get this book. Again, it's called Turnpike Team, A History of the New Jersey Nets, 1977 to 2012. It is published by McFarland, and it is available now wherever you find good books. And, of course, we love you to purchase this book through our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode, which is numbered 289. My goodness, 289 is the episode. You'll see it on the website, and you'll find a convenient link to the book there. And by doing so, you'll give us a few shekels of referral love. We appreciate that. Courtesy of our friends at Amazon. Of course, you'll get it as fast as humanly possible, either through the Kindle or paperback versions of said. Again, it's called Turnpike Team, A History of the New Jersey Nets. And if you go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, search up 289, the episode number, and click through that link. Thank you very much, and you will enjoy the book immensely, as I did for sure. And hopefully you will immensely enjoy this conversation too. Here we go with Łukasz Muniowski and myself talking about the gritty New Jersey Nets from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the aughts, and even a little bit in the 2010s before they became Brooklyn. Please enjoy this conversation. As always, enjoy. Our little journey for this silly little show has been this weird, perverse, frankly, fascination with teams and leagues and situations in professional sports that have come and gone. And I know you've done quite a bit of work. I've seen your work and highlighted elsewhere in terms of other sports stories and writings and all that kind of stuff. And the New Jersey Nets, to me, is a really interesting example of that, because we know them now today, of course, as the Brooklyn Nets, but they had a history before they were known as the New Jersey Nets, and they obviously currently have a future, we still hope and think and believe, as the now Brooklyn Nets. But it's interesting that you sort of focused on this sort of a period of time in between those two things. I guess the question to start with is, why?
Well, to be honest, I find it always interesting to root for the underdog. And, the state of New Jersey as a whole is seen as a somewhat of an underdog, as it's placed between two much larger states. So you have Pennsylvania and you have New York. So they always live in like the shadow of the two, and they're like seen as a land in between. And the New Jersey Nets, so the New Jersey incarnation of the Nets, was always a team somewhere stuck in between. And there was a recurring motive when I looked at the New Jersey Nets, is that they were always like in a state of, how should I call it? Even when they were good, you knew that something bad would happen. And it was the same whether we're talking about like landing the first pick in the draft or being in the NBA finals. You somewhat always knew that something bad is going to happen. And I found that really fascinating, that throughout their history, this was like this recurring pattern, that they could never put it all together. So that's what I found that interesting. Plus, I was also a fan of the New Jersey Nets myself, because I like Jason Kidd a lot. He was one of my favorite players, because I'm a short white guy. So I mean, he's not short. By NBA standards, he's like in the middle. I think he's 6'4", but I could like relate to that. A pass-first guard who always plays hard, who isn't a particularly good scorer, but he sort of makes a difference on the court. So I always wanted to emulate that, even though I failed miserably. That's why I became a writer rather than a basketball player.
Well, all right. So let me reiterate the word why, but put it in context, because for the benefit of our audience, your accent and where you're located now from where we're having this conversation seems to indicate that perhaps you may not have grown up and understood truly what it means to be a New Jerseyan like I have been. Perhaps you have some experience with New Jersey, or maybe you're just doing this from afar. Again, the question, why this particular story then for you?
Okay, so
don't get me wrong. I love it because I'm from New Jersey, and I everything you just said made me smile and wince at the same time. How you know that, though, is pretty interesting to me, because if you didn't live there, I'm really curious as to how you figured that out.
First of all, I have an accent. I always thought that I had this perfect American accent, so I'm kind of disappointed.
No, you're pretty well off. Don't worry about it.
I totally know. I know. My accent is just awful, and there's like no way working around it. So why? Well, that's a really good question, because to be honest, I don't really know. It's just that there are some stories and there are some teams that you like feel close to, and I found this story of the New Jersey Nets somewhat, I found the New Jersey Nets first. So actually how I learned about the United States, because I'm an assistant professor at the University of Szczecin, and it's in like northwestern Poland. And I actually wrote my PhD on narratives of the careers of selected NBA players. So I got into basketball fairly early, like when I was like 6 or 7. My father used to watch the NBA, and there was this guy called Michael Jordan, and my father just loved him completely. And because of that, I developed sort of, not hatred, but I always wanted to, I was always rooting for the other guys. And New Jersey Nets, back in 97, 98, I think it was 97, 98 season. Yeah, they were the 8th seed, and they were the first team that Chicago needed to like pass in order to, claim what would turn out to be their last NBA championship title. And I just got into that, and I started digging really deeper into my NBA fandom, and found that, I felt something for the New Jersey Nets. And the similarity that comes to my mind is like when you're watching wrestling, it's bad, but somehow you feel stuff. It makes you feel stuff. Whether we're talking about like heels or faces, that the story is somewhat, kitschy in a bit, but that it will make you feel, that there will be certain emotions involved. And the New Jersey Nets were a team that made me feel stuff. And then I got really deeper into analyzing the United States. I've been to the States a couple of times, and I got to know the people, got to see some places. And everywhere I went, people actually, made fun of New Jersey, which was kind of sad, because I didn't really understand why people were speaking about Jersey in such terms. So I really wanted to understand that. Hence, well, I got into writing this book. That I thought that when I got into like the writing process, New Jersey Nets were a team that probably best described what it meant to be from Jersey. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, when you're thinking about the New Jersey Devils, they're successful. They're a solid NHL team. When you think about the New York Giants, even though they are in New Jersey, they claim to be from New York, right? So they're sort of ashamed of their heritage, whereas the New Jersey Nets were the New Jersey Nets. You had the name itself, right? Nets. I mean, what kind of a name is that for a basketball team? It's not really creative. I mean, it's just a regular name. When you have like the random name generator for NBA teams, that's like probably one of the first names that generator could come up with. So that's why I got into all that.
Well, there's so much to unpack there, and that's why it's fascinating to me as a native New Jerseyan myself. Yeah, we could probably have a whole psychological conversation about New Jersey, having grown up in such. And yeah, you're right.
That would be great because I would like to learn from you, more about that experience.
Well, I mean, be careful what you wish for, but I mean, look, it's true.
I'm from Poland, okay? I'm from Poland. I can relate. We're stuck between like Russia and Germany, and we've been stuck from the beginning of our history, stuck between these two large, powerful countries. So I can relate to that.
I marvel, frankly, at somebody who, like yourself, who is not a native of the area, grew up there, or spent a lot of time there. You actually have pegged it pretty darn closely as sort of this, let's call it an identity crisis, right? Having grown up, there, right? The exercise is always, where are you from, Tim? Well, if I assume that there's a lack of understanding or sophistication about the New York area in that person's question, I'll just say the New York area. I grew up in New York. It's just a lot easier, right? It's convenient convention, right? But if there's a level of understanding there, I'll go into the Northern New Jersey thing, because as you probably have determined already, just by this story, the polyglot that is the New York metropolitan area. I mean, this is not unique to major, gigantic metropolitan areas around the world, but very different, right? You grew up in New York City. Even in the boroughs are very different experiences. New Jersey, very different than Connecticut, very different than Long Island, et cetera. Yet there is somewhat of a common thread. There's this sort of New York-ish thing that, for better or for worse, defines all of them when you get right down to it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the place that you come from really determines your whole life, which is like a cliche thing to say. It's kind of stating the obvious, but that's true. And in the case of the Nets, it was the same as well, because they originally started in New Jersey for a year, and that sort of determined their destiny. I think that's at least the thesis that I'm presenting here in this book.
Yeah, and that's
trying to present.
That's the irony, right? Having started out in New Jersey, which is even lost to history, frankly, which is part of sort of the story here. But all right, let me back up for a second. So it sounds to me like you and your father and others, as your NBA fandom almost sort of coincided with, I guess the Nets' ascendance, if you will, to the NBA Finals in those years in the late 2000s, right? Which was
it started kind of earlier, actually, in the early 90s. But in the 90s, I mean, I was born in 85, so I was 14 or 15 when they made their first finals, something like that. So I had a lot of time to just, as a high school kid, to just follow basketball, as opposed to when you grow up and you get into studies and you get to work, so you don't have a lot of time. So those were the years of my NBA fandom, but it started way earlier. Like the 95, 96 season was probably the first that I remember like vividly, instead of just singular games. So it was around that time.
Yeah, and it's also interesting too, because that's kind of when the team was being kind of essentially purposefully rebuilt and rebranded. There was even the possibility around that time that they might have been even renamed to the New Jersey Swamp Dragons, right? So a very interesting time. But I guess the real sort of point of my question in there was, look, you're clearly the identification is going on in your mind with this team, but it's rare, or was rare, especially given how the NBA had, from a media perspective, really taken on a new level of interest worldwide, by Michael Jordan fueled and all of that. The New Jersey Nets were not part of the featured NBA games that were hitting your screens elsewhere outside the United States. Very rare, right? They're definitely an also ran. And for them to even break into the playoffs and then actually be successful in the playoffs, I guess you experience sort of the beginnings of that unloved and unfancied kind of dynamic, and maybe even had a special sort of feeling as they became more successful on the court.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, other teams that I rooted for around this time were the Vancouver Grizzlies, about whom I also wrote a book. It's going to be published next year by Tennessee University Press, about how Vancouver lost the Grizzlies. So in my mind, I have this actual trilogy of books of failed franchises that I sort of would like to write someday. So it's the Nets, it's the Vancouver Grizzlies, and it's the Charlotte Bobcats. So I have like these 3 books that I would like to produce, but I know absolutely nothing about the area of Charlotte, apart from the issue with the toilets, so like the misgendered toilets a couple of years ago or something like that, and that's only the stuff that I know. Yeah, so the Nets weren't actually on my radar, and the first thing that I remember like vividly about Nets was the trade in the year 96, in the season 96-97. I think it was that season, when like half of the franchise was traded to the Mavericks. And I remember that I think they traded Sean Bradley to Dallas Mavericks, one of the few players, one of the many players who were like traded. And the first memories I have is actually like, I think it was not Jim Jackson was playing for the Nets, so he was like one of my favorite players, because he was supposed to be one of the few. Well, once again the word few. Sorry, he was supposed to be the next Michael Jordan in a line of many next Michael Jordans, and I actually found myself rooting for him. And yeah, it was actually the first time that I like had the possibility of watching New Jersey Nets games. And the thing was that actually, Poland isn't the most revered country in the world, right? So actually the NBA was giving us, as in Polish television, a lot of games which weren't particularly we didn't get like the Knicks versus the Bulls. Instead, we got, for example, the Toronto Raptors, who were bad at the time, playing against, I don't know, the Nets. I remember that we used to watch with my father the Mavericks a lot because of German television, and they had Dirk Nowitzki. So German television was showing a lot of Dallas Mavericks games. And those were like the teams that we actually were able to watch, as opposed to these great NBA powerhouses. They were available to us only in the playoffs because there was no alternative. So otherwise, we actually got to see quite a few, bad NBA teams, which was actually kind of entertaining and educational because it was still great basketball, to be honest. So yeah, and it expanded our knowledge of the NBA.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. I mean, we're talking obviously a generation of or two even of media, right? Back in the 1990s, even it was really sort of the explosion of of cable and satellite television, right? But even then, right, if the packages weren't sort of, hitting your screens and stuff, that's interesting that the NBA games that you were seeing were not sort of the top tier exports, right? But yeah, I mean, look, there are these dozens of other temes, right, that make up the day-to-day existence of the league, and it's not just all Michael Jordan and the LA Lakers and all the time, right? There's an 82 game plus schedule plus a 2 months worth of playoffs, right? So it has to be some stuff that goes on before and during all that kind of stuff. So let me ask you this. So as you become intrigued by this team and frankly even start to personally, I guess, relate to this team for various reasons, what part of your scholarly self kicks in, and then why go deep, and why do you decide to focus only on that New Jersey set of years in this writing that you're doing versus, I know you make an allusion to the beginning years, right? The New York Nets, the Long Island thing, and then obviously since they've gone on to Brooklyn, but it's curious to me why you picked literally this New Jersey section, I guess, of their lives from 96 or so until they moved to Brooklyn. I'm curious as to why that particular area, as you probably went back and learned about the history of this team.
I mean, because of the way the New Jersey Jersey-ness of the Nets was treated by the Brooklyn management and like the owners of the team, during the last 2 years, they have eliminated the word New Jersey from the away jerseys, and the Newark court also did not have the name New Jersey on it, just Nets. So the way they tried to break away with the past, I found it kind of, well, I wouldn't say I was offended by that, but I found it kind of unfair because, I mean, there were people who were capable of playing basketball in New Jersey, and they had an entertaining team. I mean, they made the finals twice. For 2 years in a row, they have been in the NBA Finals. And they had solid players. I mean, they had fans who actually cared for that team. So I found it unfair to these fans. And, well, I also wanted to, I mean, every time you write a book, you learn something. You get motivated to, to dig deeper into a certain topic. And the more I dug into the topic, the more I found my interest in the Nets validated. And, well, I was just saddened by the whole thing, by the Nets marketing, by the way New Jersey was treated by the whole ownership. And that's what I wanted to write about this team and these players who just sort of had, well, whether it was a case of bad luck, bad timing, pick whatever you like, they just couldn't catch a break. And I wanted to write about that because I found that captivating and interesting.
So that resonates with me, and that's certainly something we've discovered on the various conversations across a whole wider range of sports and previous incarnations, I guess is what we could call them, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the questions that I often ask guests in situations where teams have had either previous ports of call or places of domicile, or frankly have just gone through rebrands and have not moved physically, but for whatever other reason, maybe a new arena, or they moved from a New York City to a New Jersey or whatever, still in the region. And that's where does these sort of legacies, where do these legacies live, right? And frankly, how much or how little do the current owners of these teams and the leagues that they're in embrace or distance themselves from their previous lives? And it sounds to me like, and I think rightly so, right? You're talking about a Brooklyn ownership group, and I get it's a business, right? But how much or how little one retains the history The Nets as a franchise, I mean, they didn't start in Brooklyn. I mean, I'm sure there's a whole generation of fans who think they did, right? Which is its own issue, right? But, there was stuff that happened before the Brooklyn version of the Nets. And if you're a fan, right, of the current version, I would imagine you would at least be curious as to what came before this team in the Barclays Center, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the whole history of the New Jersey Nets is actually what made this particular roster possible. Because, I mean, Kyrie Irving grew up in New Jersey. And he grew up a New Jersey kid, just fan of the Nets. And he wanted to return home. Even though, I mean, that was the narrative, that he was returning home, even though he wasn't returning home. But without Kyrie Irving, the Nets don't get Kevin Durant. And without Kevin Durant, you don't get what's going on right now. So they have actually improved this season. And this season may be finally, the year when they make a run to the Eastern Conference Finals, maybe even the finals, who knows? So, I mean, without this whole history, you don't get this particular incarnation of the Nets. And the fact that the Brooklyn Nets were sort of hesitant to embrace that history, that it took them 8 years, I think, since they relocated. Because they relocated in 2012, and in 2020, only in 2020 did they introduce throwback New Jersey Nets like jerseys. So, I mean, 8 years is a lot of time in sports. It's like a whole dynasty or two, even if you want to be, I don't know, even more picky about whether a dynasty takes, 2 championships, 3 championships. So 8 years is a lot. And the reason that they paid homage to New Jersey, that's kind of, I think that it was actually Irving's doing that they decided to pay homage to New Jersey. So it took a superstar player with a big ego, big personality, who convinced the team that it's actually okay to remember your history, to remember your past, which is exactly what they did with these jerseys that pretend to be old New Jersey Nets jerseys, but they aren't really. So, yeah, that's what I found interesting as well.
Yeah, it's also it's also hard not to be cynical, right? I mean, a great example is in the NHL with the former Hartford Whalers, right? A much beloved, and perhaps maybe fits your sort of your thesis.
Well, the story that is, right?
Yeah, right. So in between Boston and New York, same kind of dynamic. I don't know how much of a hockey fan you are, but same sort of dynamic I think could fit your narrative. And they moved to Carolina, or Raleigh, North Carolina specifically, and only recently, within the last handful of years. And now, so the Hartford fans, right, and they're frankly still quite a few of them. It's the highest selling jersey merchandise in the NHL that's not a current franchise. It's still a pretty well-known and well-regarded logo in the hearts and the minds of people of Hartford. But
and it's a beautiful logo, by the way.
It's gorgeous, and we've had a couple of conversations as to how that was built and created. But the thing is, though, that you talk to Hartford fans, and they're kind of like, we love the fact that we're being remembered again, right? But yet there's also that sort of, it's dripping with cynicism because it's clearly a money grab. And the franchise currently kind of benefits from that without much regard or benefit, frankly, to the old Hartford fans.
Yeah. And I mean, the same thing happened with the tie-dye jerseys, which were reintroduced, and they were presented as like a homage paid to New Jersey, even though the Nets wore these jerseys just for a season. I think it was 1991, if I remember correctly. So, and they were criticized heavily for wearing those jerseys. And now you pay homage to the team by wearing the jerseys which were there just for a season, which is like a blink of an eye in sports terms. And yet you present that as a sort of, as you're looking towards the past with pride, even though these jerseys were definitely not looked at with pride around the time that they came around. So it was just kind of confusing to me why these particular jerseys and why around that time, sort of how much happened. There's like no logical explanation to that, apart from business reasons, as you said. It's just a cash grab. Was just a cash grab.
All right, so let's back up for a second. Let's go back into the early. Let's go into the mid 1970s when, in earnest, the Nets fully came back, or at least started to think about coming back to New Jersey. And I guess maybe you could set the table a little bit, right? The NBA absorption, if you will, or merger, whatever you want to call it. I mean, there are different points of view on what you would call it, actually. But the Nets, right, had been oddly successful in the last years of the, slowly but surely disintegrating ABA, and doing, fairly well in Long Island. I would argue they weren't sort of drawing with respect to how well they were doing on the court. But it's an interesting sort of backdrop, right, as to 1976, 1977. The leagues are merging. Finally, this competition is over. The Nets have survived this merger, or at least will go on. But it obviously is almost sort of maybe emblematic of the good and the bad of that, and the Nets franchise, maybe a little setup for that. And Dr. J obviously playing a starring role in that, and maybe not for the right reasons.
Yeah, so the NBA, the ABA basically is able to survive the ABA was dying, it was evident. And out of the 6 remaining franchises during the last season, 4 actually joined the NBA. So it was the Nets, I think it was also the Pacers, the Nuggets, and the Spurs, and the Kentucky Colonels, and the Spirits of St. Louis folded. Well, the Spirits of St. Louis were interesting in their own right, by the way. So when the final ABA season concludes, the Nets are the champions, and it's the New York Nets. And as you said, the star player is Dr. J, right? Julius Erving, who was, I don't remember if he was from Brooklyn. I mean, he was from New York, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah,
I believe, yeah,
indeed.
Yeah, so he was a New York playground legend. And, in order to actually be able to play in the New York metropolitan area, I think it was like 75, there was like a 75-mile radius when it comes to competition. So you couldn't have another team in the same, in the proximity of, I think it was 75 miles, and remember.
Yeah, there's sort of those restrictions, if you will, and the territorial rights, so to speak. And by the way, Dr. J was born in Roosevelt, Long Island, which was a pretty big area of sort of that Long Island into Queens, New York kind of thing. So yes, definitely a New York guy.
Yeah. Okay. So not Brooklyn. So my bad. So in his 3 years, when he enters the ABA, and he's the biggest superstar that the league has, and he plays for Virginia Squires, I think, and then Squires are unable to stay competitive in the market, so they collapse, and they trade Dr. J to another ABA team, which is the New York Nets. And when the Nets enter the NBA, they enter the NBA as the New York Nets, but they enter the NBA without Dr. J, because in order to be able to play there, they need to pay the merger settlement, and it's around $5 million, which was a lot back then. And I think that the team owner at the time said that the merger agreement killed the Nets as an NBA franchise, because in order to stay in the region, they had to trade Dr. J, and they basically traded him for cash. I think it was $2.5 million, something like that, in order to be able to pay the amount that was necessary. And the whole amount, I think it was around 11 million. So they just got 2.5 million for Dr. J. And they had problems drawing, at least at the beginning. And they had to play, I think, at Rutgers Center a year later when they moved to Jersey.
Oh yeah, all right. So let me stop you there. Let me stop you there because
impacted the franchise for a number of years.
Yeah, let me stop you there.
You said, I mean, it's emblematic of the team already that it entered the league at such a disadvantage without their star player, and they got basically nothing in return.
Yeah, so that's it. I mean, so in many respects, the New York Knicks, right, almost were either lucky or cunning or both in their ability to defang, I guess, whatever the Nets would be coming into the league, right? Talk about defending their literally just essentially taking their heart and soul, that team, Dr. J, and essentially forcing a sale to make that happen. So it's ironic, or maybe not ironic. I mean, either the Nets were, the Knicks, the New York Knicks, right, are almost a villain in this story, perhaps clearly a villain in this story, in that either through luck or through cunning, the best of times and the worst of times for this Nets franchise, they finally they survive the merger, yet here they are completely defanged, because their bread and butter, their main star attraction, has to be sold in order to pay the bills and maintain their status in this new league.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but also, I mean, the Nets found themselves too often trying to emulate the Knicks, although that happened later. But at the beginning, they were at a disadvantage. And for a number of seasons, they had their issues, right? I mean, they are able to draft Bernard King. They get Michael Ray Richardson from the Knicks in a trade. I'm sorry for that. And they even have a remote possibility of getting Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who seriously considered becoming a Net in 1981 because of the proximity of New Jersey to New York, because he wanted to leave the Lakers. So the New Jersey was one of his preferred destinations. And finally, in the summer of 1981, they get, I mean, luck strikes finally, because they get a new coach in Larry Brown, and they get a 21-year-old power forward named Buck Williams, who becomes the first New Jersey Nets franchise player for a number of seasons.
So let me back up for a second. So okay. As the Nets get absorbed into the NBA, okay. I guess the question is, why, from your perception and your research, why wouldn't they stay in Long Island at the Nassau Coliseum, where at least they'd established some kind of winning tradition? I wouldn't say maybe huge fan support, maybe, and then instead turn towards a completely new and uncharted life in New Jersey when there wasn't even a stadium ready for them yet.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because who knows, right? There are a lot of confusing decisions in the history of the New Jersey Nets, and that's just one of them. Why did they decide to move to New Jersey, even though they had to pay the Knicks still for a number of years, and they had to give away their draft picks later on as well to the Knicks, or exchange draft picks for not meeting payments? So it's a really confusing decision that I don't really understand that move.
Well, they certainly weren't drawing very well. I mean, and obviously their first year in the NBA, right, didn't help because they didn't have Dr. J, and they almost had written off the first season, which is an unfortunate way to start your new life in the big old NBA.
Yeah, and they play at Rutgers University Center, and the attendance there, I think, was like 8,000. So that's not a lot. Even if the arena would be at capacity, still that's not a lot of fans coming into the games.
Well,
so
I will tell you. I'll interrupt you for a second. I remember. So this is frankly when I sort of became a New Jersey Nets fan. Right, this is around my sort of teenage years, and indeed, right. So the promise of this new, the Meadowlands, right? So the Meadowlands sports complex, right? The original Giant Stadium, right, debuted in the fall of 1976. The New York Cosmos soccer team came in 1977, and Pelé. It was a huge sort of thing, and it was one of those sort of new modern stadiums at that time, and the promise then of the next piece of that complex beyond just a giant stadium and a horse racing facility was an indoor arena. And but it's interesting how it's clear the Knicks were also sort of continuing to play the spoiler to prevent the Nets from moving even from Long Island to New Jersey. They sort of, regardless of the territorial rights, they were still getting in the way of that. But I remember my first ever games were during those 4 seasons they played at the RAC, the Rutgers Athletic Center, right? And it's interesting because it felt very temporary, right? But it was a hell of a lot of fun because number one, the New Jersey Nets were an NBA team. Great. Number two, the Rutgers Athletic Center, 8,000 or so seats, was still pretty kind of intimate. And it was kind of a really cool way to be pretty darn close to these NBA players and stars. I remember bumping into Bernard King and a couple of other players, just because that was the only way you could get into the stadium was to go walk by the court. It was a hell of a time, and it was certainly not the distant, palatial, holier than thou like Madison Square Garden experience, and that was kind of cool by comparison.
But also, I mean, NBA in particular wasn't as popular back then, right? When we're talking about professional basketball in the 1980s. The one thing that comes to mind is drugs, and players had drug issues. And I mean, New Jersey Nets suffered from that as well, whether we're talking about Orlando Woolridge in the later part of the 1980s, on whether we're talking about Michael Ray Richardson, who came from the New York Knicks because of his drug issues, or whether we're talking about Bernard King, although later. These old players had certain substance abuse issues. So, as opposed to the college game, which seemed like pure, at least that's the lesson the lesson that I got from like reading the newspapers and just seeing the coverage then that NCAA games got, as opposed to NBA games, which were just like you got these tiny like scores, and this guy scored the most points, and that was basically it. Whereas when we're talking about college games, the coverage was much greater. And what you're talking about, the intimacy. So now maybe I can ask you a question. Was it the same, like the atmosphere? Was it very different from attending Rutgers games?
No, it felt to me like this was it was appealing, certainly, that with the pro game at the top level was coming to New Jersey, right? So this is goes back to your sort of thesis earlier on. The New York Giants obviously had moved to the Meadowlands, and there was some consternation, and it played out later on too about New Jersey, New York, and what the labels are, and that sort of broke the mold and sort of created a conversation about where the team is playing relative to its name. The Nets, right, were now really and I don't put the New York Cosmos in that too, because they sort of had their own sort of dynamic, and they just dropped the name New York altogether. And that was a whole that was a circus. The New Jersey Nets, though, to your point, right? They were the first, not first historically, but in this sort of time frame, a dedicated New Jersey branded top tier professional team. And I think a lot of New Jerseyans, to your point earlier, found that alluring, and with the knowledge that a stadium was being built, right? And Giant Stadium there, and its immediate success for both soccer and football really kind of added a beacon of promised stability. And like, this is not only real now and temporary for a couple of years at Rutgers, but will be more real in the years to come when we have, quote unquote, our own home facility. It will be the cementing, if you will, of reality of New Jersey having its own professional NBA basketball franchise. So I would characterize the crowd as being really into it and frankly enjoying the intimacy along the way.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who like prefers smaller leagues to the bigger stuff, I mean, I can totally relate to that. I mean, I prefer intimacy as well. So I can get behind that as well. That's what I'm thinking.
We also had on our show, I think our episode number 100 a couple of years back, current New York Yankees broadcaster, but then former New Jersey Nets broadcaster, John Sterling. It's a great episode if our listeners haven't heard it, because before he became sort of a longtime Yankee voice, John Sterling was a sports talk guy in New York and literally was hustling lots of startup leagues and teams from the WHA and even the NHL. But he became kind of the voice, the spirited voice, shall we say, of the New Jersey Nets. And some of his signature catch calls were, when they were competitive, and this was the years when Kevin Lockery was coach. I played against his son in grammar school in northern New Jersey, ironically. They were the gutty gritty New Jersey Nets. That was his tagline. And they were gutty and gritty, and they were not expected to win. They were not winning. They had a lot of character and soul, and you kind of what you said earlier, you kind of identified with them because here they were, the New Jersey's team in the big bad NBA, and they weren't always competitive, but when they were, Jan Van Predikoff and Bernard King and Bernard Sky, BBK, you come up with all these great names. It was fun. They were fun. They were fun and interesting and intriguing, and you knew they were going somewhere, even if they weren't performing really well at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of players. When you go through the history of New Jersey Nets, they had a lot of great players. It was just a case of, I don't know, like wrong place or wrong time, as I've said. When we're talking about guys, even from my past, right? When I was growing up, there was this whole excitement around like Stephon Marbury when he came to New Jersey. And then it turned out that he wasn't such a great fit, but eventually they got Jason Kidd for him, which was great, which worked out greatly for the Nets. So you had guys like that. You had Derek Coleman, who was supposed to be, I mean, in the present day NBA, Derek Coleman would be a perfect forward. So he was somewhere between number 3 and number 4 positions. So a lot of great players actually played for the New Jersey Nets. So yeah, I can totally understand the excitement for that, because you got to witness a lot of great players. And I mean, when I started talking about Buck Williams, he also was this blue-collar, tough player that every coach basically wanted to have, because he conducted himself. I mean, there isn't a bad story about Buck Williams. The team was throwing his name around in like trade rumors, and until he basically was okay with it, until he reached a breaking point and they had to trade him. So there's a lot of exciting and interesting players from the history of the Nets.
Yeah, look, I think too, obviously the turn of the decade, 1981, when the team finally moved into the Well, it's now it used to be most recently known as the IZ Center, and that was the Continental Arena before that. But the Brendan Byrne Meadowlands Arena. There's even a controversy around that. So add that to your story, right? The naming of it, right? Brendan Byrne, the governor of New Jersey, former governor of New Jersey at the time, finally when it got built, not necessarily the most bit revered politician, shall we say? Having his name on a new stadium. So some people just literally called it the Meadowlands Arena. Even in advertising, some of the teams like the New Jersey Rockets of the indoor league at the time, they wouldn't say Brendan Byrne Arena. They would say Meadowlands Arena because that's how controversial it was. But it was a brand new and gorgeous stadium. And it certainly gave some credence to the fact that, hey, the Nets have arrived. And it's interesting. It was a promising start, but, it didn't. They still were in the shadow for sure with the Knicks and the rest of the league.
Yeah, totally. And and when we think about Brendan Byrne in this case, we think about, he put forth some laws regarding the environment, right? But at the same time, he made an exception for the Meadowlands. So he wanted to protect the environment, but in the case of when the big leagues came calling, he made an exception. So as you said, that's kind of controversial. And in the year of 1981, as I said earlier, they get Buck Williams, they get coach Larry Brown, and they actually are, well, I'm afraid to use the word, but they are good. Buck Williams, he's extremely durable. He looks like he's got like all muscle, right? And I think he missed just one game in, it was 6 seasons, just one regular season game. So we're talking about the durable, tough player who always puts in the effort. And you get a young, promising coach in Larry Brown, who was actually an ABA player, who cares about winning, who cares about this team. They get Michael Ray Richardson, they get Otis Birdsong. And when they are supposed to play their first exhibition game in the Brendan Byrne Arena, there's a power failure during an exhibition game. And this is sort of like the recurring motive, or as we like to put it in literature studies, we're talking about foreshadowing of the things that are to come in the 1980s.
Yeah, sure. Injuries, for example. Darryl Dawkins, right, was a star center and was sort of one of those players that you try to build around, right, and have a Buck Williams or, a utility player, like a Mike Jaminski. But, he slips and falls and hurts his back further and all kinds of things sort of befall. And you wonder, it's almost like the Clippers, right? The Clippers, I think, are maybe the only other analog I can think of, right? That, in their sort of LA and then San Diego and then LA again and back and forth. It's almost like one step forward, one step backward. They get to neutral, it seems, a lot of times during the 80s and even the early 90s.
Yeah, but isn't it like the same for many like mid-tier NBA franchise? That's why, the history of the New Jersey Nets, maybe more than anything else, allows us to see how hard it actually is to be successful in a league as competitive as the NBA, because you have this team which supposedly does all the right things. They hire the right coaches. You have such big names as I said, Larry Brown. You have Bill Fitch, who was, beyond a shadow of a doubt, a great NBA coach. You get Chuck Daly, who was a great NBA coach. And you're just, things happen. It's just that things happen to you for one reason or the other, provoked or unprovoked even. It's not like caused by any sort of hubris or whatever. Just, by sheer luck, or lack thereof, you're unable to put things together. And that's how it happens.
Well, look, it also, I think another sort of thread in that, embedded in that, is the fact that they're also, even as the Nets became truly competitive and started making the finals in the in the early aughts with Jason Kidd and the like, right? The idea of the Nets in the finals or as a major player in the top tier on the court, right? It's one thing to actually do that, but even still in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, I mean, even in this amongst the the intelligentsia, if you will, in the NBA or the basketball world, it still feels like the Nets are sort of the also rans, the number twos, the Mets versus the Yankees in the New York area, the Jets versus the Giants, right? Some of that is for many years Real Madrid versus Atletico, right? Only recently has Atletico become sort of similar tier, right? There's always this is the sort of derby, I guess, kind of dynamic of having two teams in a metropolitan area, and for many years. Right. And especially in the New Jersey realm, the Nets were kind of the other team. Right. And with a capital O, the other team. Right. It's, the Knicks, the rivalry wasn't even much of a rivalry. That's how much the Knicks overshadowed this team, even and despite the fact that the Nets were competitive and in NBA finals for the first time. Maybe, to me, in the early aughts, that was, having grown up being a New Jersey Nets fan, it was incredible to see. I couldn't believe my eyes, frankly. That's how much I didn't expect it.
Yeah, and the thing was that actually when they got successful, the Knicks were sort of becoming, I think it was the worst time in Knicks history, if I remember correctly, just from like the wins and losses.
Well, you're talking after the Pat Ewing years.
After the
right.
After the Pat Ewing years. So they make the finals in '99, and everything just sort of starts to collapse because of injuries and because of bad management decisions. And the Nets become good at around the same time, and yet people aren't coming to the games. I mean, the Nets are playing Princeton offense, which is just sort of like a team-oriented style. So you see all the players, you don't have hero ball in New Jersey. You have this like gritty blue-collar team. You have a team which relies on Jason Kidd, who is the ultimate like team player, who cares about his teammates, who is universally beloved by his teammates, even though he had some issues in his personal life around the same time. Let's leave it at that. And they're playing tough, gritty basketball in the 2002 playoffs. And yet the league, the narrative around the league is that, they are facing sort of the surprise of the season, the Boston Celtics. So you have the Lakers on one side, and the league and people around the league, they're rooting for the Celtics to play the Lakers in the finals. They want to once again relive what they witnessed in the 1980s, and you have these like narratives which are so promising, and yet Nets spoil all that.
Will the Celtics foul? Strickland against Kidd. They're going to knock it away. Strickland falls down, and they're going to let him play it out. There's about a 3-second difference between the shot and game clock. The New Jersey Nets will continue one of the most remarkable one-season turnarounds in NBA history. From 26 wins last year to a trip to the NBA Finals. An amazing story. The New Jersey Nets are in the NBA Finals. Byron Scott and the Nets eliminate the Boston Celtics in 6 games. It's been a wonderful season for the Celtics, a great turnaround, but they fall short to what was the better team in this series. Once again, our final score from the Fleet Center. The Nets 96 and the Celtics 88. Nets win the series 4-2. For PJ Carlissimo, Lewis Johnson, and our entire talented crew, this is Mike Breen. We now send you to the second game of our playoff doubleheader. We go to Marv Albert at the Staples Center in LA.
And they sort of in my opinion, suffered the grunt of that the games aren't going to be as marketable, and sort of they become more of an afterthought. And the thing is that when we're talking about the 2002 Western Conference Finals, those were probably the most controversial conference finals, or that's probably the most controversial controversial series that I remember, that I have witnessed. So I understand why people were sort of disappointed in the league, and yet the Nets like suffered because of that. Like years later, we found out that there was a refereeing scandal, and some people think that the series was fixed. I mean, I don't know, to be honest. So the Nets like suffered because of the misperception that the NBA was, well, they suffered because of the, how should I put it? They suffer because, so the image of NBA suffers, and who, I don't know how to put it. Okay, I dug myself into a hole. Sorry for that. So the image of the league suffers, and I mean the Lakers are still gonna get their money. New York Knicks are gonna get their money as well. So it's the Nets who suffer the most because of the tainted image of the league, because people weren't actually interested in the series. And next year they played the Spurs, and it's probably I think it was the least watched series in, well, since the Jordan years. It was the least watched NBA series. Like you had two small market teams, and people actually, well, because of people ignoring that series, it was highly competitive, and people just don't remember these series as well or as profoundly, even though they were highly interesting, because of like the lack of marketability of both teams, because both teams played like team-oriented basketball, which could be appreciated by basketball purists, but not really by like an average NBA fan who just wants to see stars compete.
Yeah, that's really sort of telling, because yeah, I mean, you even see that sort of dynamic with the New Jersey Devils, right? Their Meadowlands Arena co-tenants there. I mean, there was a Stanley Cup series after, I think, when the Devils won their third Stanley Cup championship against the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. Yet another kind of sort of shadow type, second type of franchise in a bigger metropolitan area, Los Angeles. Yeah, I mean, I think too the fact that a team is in New Jersey in this respect, and the Nets story, it's not like your agents are looking to find you a place in New Jersey, right? It's not as sexy as New York, even though you might still be in that market in terms of media. It's not as sexy as Los Angeles or Chicago, right, where there are lots of other opportunities, shall we say. It's not sort of a prime destination, and that sort of, I don't know, that logic, it just kind of almost compounds itself, right? You almost get an inferiority complex. It just kind of keeps reiterating itself, especially if there's a bad season or two, and even despite a really good season or two, the attendance and stuff, right? So you wonder, I guess, if you look back on this story, right? Does a New Jersey, quote unquote, saddle the franchise regardless of how well or not well that they do? I mean, I can't extend that logic to the New Jersey Devils that much. It's even worse because there are three franchises in the New York area. But it maybe speaks to what you were talking about earlier. New Jersey is something in between, and when a team in New Jersey and branded New Jersey does well, it's odd because usually it's the second choice of everybody involved, right? Whether it's Philadelphia or New York. And when a New Jersey itself tends to succeed, it almost feels like it's a rarity or an occasional than it is something sustainable and real over time.
Yeah, and especially when you have a guy who actually loves to be here. I mean, you have a guy like Jason Kidd, and the team was actually going out of its way to accommodate him, even though after the finals, there's this story that he actually had a chance of joining the Spurs, so another small market team, and he was he was in San Antonio. He agreed to leave, but when he was on the plane, he sort of changed his mind when he was going home, and he said, I want to stay in New Jersey, which is like, from the perspective of sports, I mean, you have stars who want to play in these big markets, right? And we've seen that when we were witnessing the player empowerment era, which is still going on, which is nothing bad, by the way, because I mean, teams have held dominions over players for far too long, right? But you have players like Giannis, for example, who are okay with playing for a small market team because players will join you, right? When you're a guy like Jason Kidd and the present day NBA, it would probably be easier to form a better team around that player as opposed to how it was during that time because of like the lack of marketing possibilities. And another thing that was interesting about these Nets was that most of the players lived in the New York metropolitan area anyway. So they didn't actually, grow roots around the New Jersey. And I can totally get the analogy with the New Jersey Devils. And maybe I can ask you as a native of New Jersey, how did Devils actually manage to stay in New Jersey? Was it because of winning? Was it the winning that turned the tide and actually made them stay? Or did something better happen? Because, I mean, I know hockey, but I just watched the playoffs.
I think so there are two answers, I think, to that. Number one is it's obviously 3 teams in the New York metro area. And from a geographical perspective, it's spread out enough, right? You have a team in Manhattan in the Rangers. You have a team, or at least did have a team, solidly on Long Island, not sort of at the cusp like they are now with their brand new arena, the Islanders. Mm-hmm. And the Devils, essentially, with everything New Jersey, westward to Pennsylvania and down towards Philadelphia, right? So there was a region there. I think, though, the major reason is, is because pro hockey, from a fan perspective, from a media perspective, from a consumption perspective, is much more of a provincial kind of dynamic. It's much more of a local passion kind of thing versus a national thing. I mean, yes, there are national games, but the NHL is not, has always struggled as being sort of a nationally palatable sport. The NBA is different. NBA does have a national footprint, is much more significantly branded. You can, you may find you can live in Atlanta and be interested in a Nuggets versus LA Lakers game. Hockey's really not as much that. It's much more regional. And I think it's also more dependent on attendance and that kind of stuff. I don't think many people would have predicted it. I think the fact that they arrived in 1981 is because there's a brand new arena. And that team itself had its challenges, having been in places like Kansas City and Denver and never really succeeding too. So ironically going to New Jersey, but I think, though, it does speak maybe a little bit to what you're talking. As a media market, New Jersey is not a media market per se, as defined in the United States, right? There's the New York metropolitan area media market, and New Jersey itself is a slice of that. And it's very hard to market a team that's only regionally very centric and powerful. And so the New York Islanders in hockey and the New Jersey Devils, if they want to market themselves and advertise, they have to essentially buy the entire marketplace when 2/3 of the market really, it's not close for them to go visit and to go to a game. So it's a weird dynamic, but I guess my point is that the Devils certainly didn't hurt themselves by playing well and winning a few Stanley Cups. But let's put it in perspective. their championship parades, right, occur in the parking lot of the Meadowlands arena. Okay. That's not the same thing as the New York Rangers winning a Stanley Cup and getting to get a confetti parade down the cathedral or the Canyon of Champions in Wall Street, right, in downtown New York. And that perception actually speaks volumes, right? As a New Jerseyan, I'm full of pride, right? But it's not the same thing as the Rangers winning the Stanley Cup, because there's a lot of, it's New York and it's ticker tape parade, and New Jersey, it's a bunch of fans in a parking lot. I don't know if that changes, right? If the Devils win again, in Newark, I mean, Newark is not the sexiest place, sadly, in the firmament of the NHL, right?
Mm-hmm. But how does that apply to the fact that NHL is more of an international league, in the sense that you have players from different countries, a lot of players from different countries, as opposed to the NBA? Like, basketball has an inner city feel to it, right? So as you said, like hockey is more of a passion, like a passion thing. So also when you have players joining the league from Europe, right? When you have Giannis, and he's okay with playing in Milwaukee. You have Nikola Jokic, who's okay with playing in Denver, because that's the team that picked him. You had a guy like Dražen Petrovic, who was happy playing in New Jersey. And if the team would be winning, he undoubtedly would stay in New Jersey. But because of the fact that it wasn't winning, there was some frustration involved, and he wanted to take some time off and play in Europe and then reunite with Dino Radja in Boston. But his untimely death put these plans into the area of just plans or rumors or whatever, or unfulfilled dreams. So how do you think the international aspect weighs into that you have people who are willing to stay and grow roots in New Jersey, as opposed to just living in the big city and enjoying the perks of living in the big city?
Yeah, well, but also the secondary revenue streams from that, right? The endorsements and New York City obviously is a much more dynamic place than the suburbs of New Jersey, even though they're only 20 miles away from each other, right? I guess I really would reframe that and say the NBA as a league and pro basketball as its product has been just better or more fortunate. And maybe because it's in urban areas and has grown up as a sort of an urban sport, so to speak, over the years, has done a better job of branding itself, right? The NHL, obviously the world's best hockey league, with some of the best players internationally. But the reality is that more people know Giannis than they do Sidney Crosby, the Pittsburgh Penguins, true. Right? And I think that's just the fact that hockey, at least in the United States, hockey also, the NHL is also much more Canadian, less so, right, over the decades as the NHL has expanded into hockey
southern regions,
hockey hotbeds,
right?
Like Phoenix, right? Yeah. Right. Or even, two franchises in Southern California, or Raleigh, North Carolina, right? I mean, Florida, too, I guess the point is that despite the right moves in terms of trying to colonize Southern markets, non-traditional hockey markets, I think the success of the teams in the NHL have been at a local and regional level, but has not sort of made that leap. And maybe that's branding. And maybe, frankly, that's just hockey and cold and winter and the product relative to that of basketball, which is a little bit more accessible to more people, right? No, people who live and grew up in Miami or Fort Lauderdale, actually, with the Florida Panthers, or Tampa Bay or Phoenix, right? There's definitely a hockey community there, but it's not as robust, as in Minnesota or in Chicago or in these cold weather places where hockey is just part of your heritage. Same with basketball. I mean, basketball, I think, is much more accessible anywhere because it's a smaller court. He can play indoors and he can play outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just speculating, but the point is, I think
that was the initial idea, that you could, like, during winters, you could just play it indoors. So that's how the sport originated, right? To keep kids busy during the winter months. So,
I think it's a case of that. And look, I think hockey is just by definition, it's always been a harder national sport to grasp. Frankly, some of it's also because the NHL really was only in the Northeast and Chicago until 1969, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were very late in terms of trying to expand, and the World Hockey Association, all that stuff. But look, I mean, I want to sort of put a cul-de-sac on this. The whole idea of your initial theme at the beginning of this conversation to me only feels strengthened by this narrative in this conversation. New Jersey is what it is. It is in between things. There is clearly culture and its own thing within the world, but the reality is it's in the midst of bigger metropolitan areas and sexier places. And I'm guessing that's part of why the idea of moving the team back to, quote unquote, to New York at some point in the latter part of the 2000s and the early part of the 2010s. Maybe you could help us wrap up as to what your perception and the dynamic that you sort of researched and saw as to why giving up on New Jersey, even with a brand new arena in Newark for a couple of years, that didn't seem to be the elixir. Why move across the river to New York, in this case Brooklyn? Was that genius? Was it that desperation? Was that just, why not New Jersey further, I guess?
That's a really good question, and to be honest, there's no good answer, because as we see from the early struggles of the Brooklyn Nets, I mean, the bad luck followed them straight to Brooklyn, right? When we were talking about, like, the trade with the Boston Celtics, which set the franchise back for like 6 seasons or something like that. When we're talking about even injuries to Kyrie Irving, the injury to James Harden, I mean, KD having his foot on the line against the Milwaukee Bucks in like game, I think it was 6 of the Eastern Conference semifinals. It's just, you can't shake off the sort of the bad luck that has followed this franchise. And that's what I found the most intriguing in this narrative, in that even though it's not mentioned in the book, right, because I finished off the book in the year 2012 when they leave. So when they leave, my interest fades as well. I'm assuming that the move was financial, because they wanted to revamp the Brooklyn area, right? They wanted to, like, gentrify Brooklyn, and the reason that the local they displaced people, and the local community actually was outraged by that, and there were some protests. Even the actress Rosie Perez was involved in the protests, and you have a rapper, well, a hip hop mogul, basically, like Jay-Z, who is doing the gentrifying instead of actually helping the community that he was raised by, because it always takes a village to raise an individual. That's at least my thinking. So it's kind of confusing. Why would you leave, like, a whole market instead of sharing a market with a different team, a different franchise, as the Knicks, who are as historically rooted in the New York area, that even when they are bad, they still are able to make money and be popular because they're the Knicks, right? And what I think about that is that, well, I wouldn't say it was a mistake, because from a fan's perspective, you might hate that move, but ultimately, when the Brooklyn Nets were, during their first years in Brooklyn, when they actually weren't all that good, I've noticed in Warsaw, where I lived around the time, way more kids wearing like Brooklyn Nets stuff than I noticed during my whole lifetime. People wearing New Jersey Nets stuff, and I was one of the few who was wearing New Jersey Nets like jersey. I have my silver Jason Kidd jersey still somewhere in my parents' house. So from marketing perspective, it made a lot of sense, and ultimately the move made a lot of money. So I mean, to put things bluntly, it was all about the money. The New York market is just way bigger, even when we're talking, even in comparison to like the whole state of New Jersey, like the whole city of New York was able to be a more promising landing destination than just staying in New Jersey.
Two things there. Number one, it's a rejection, I guess, of the suburb kind of mentality, right? Which New Jersey largely is suburban, spread out, and a retro, I guess, to the urban core or the city. In this case, you know, if Brooklyn was separated out from New York and the other boroughs, it would probably be the 5th or 6th or 7th largest city in the United States, apparently, or at least it was back when they first moved there. It's still by itself, it could be a large city in its own right. But I think the other sort of part of that is, and yeah, there's also a heritage there, right? Brooklyn has a heritage as it's, I mean, the Brooklyn Dodgers baseball team still has that air of legacy, and is distinctive, right? You're from New York? No, I'm from Brooklyn, right? That's probably the most unique and stand out of the 5 boroughs, right? When it comes to that kind of identification. But the other thing is real estate. The other thing is real estate, right? So frankly, now you see that the model right now for business and sports, right, tends to be, well, there's a bunch of things, but in particular is real estate. Owning your own stadium, building and owning your own stadium, and then all the stuff that's around that either is or isn't related necessarily to game day, right? So during the off season, is there enough stuff to keep you interested either to visit or perhaps like the Atlanta Braves baseball franchise, right? Build an office park around it. So it's been, plus now betting being sort of legal mostly in lots of different places in the United States. Revenue streams, of course, it's money, but the money part is actually the real estate. And if you think about it, the guy who bought the franchise, the guy who built the stadium there in Brooklyn, right? It was all real estate and all this and rehabbing, if you will, or gentrifying, depending on your perspective, an area of Brooklyn, right? And all the stuff around it. That's sexier, I think, than let's drive 15 miles to a stadium in some parking lot in New Jersey. And then, you know, is that New Jersey's problem or issue? Don't know.
Yeah, and then placing the stadium next to the Turnpike also, which was sort of promising initially, then turned out to be like a problem, right? Because, I mean, people were stuck in traffic. So there's no tailgating in basketball. So people weren't actually looking forward to just being stuck in traffic and just spending time around the arena, as opposed to the New York Giants games back then. So yeah.
Well, let me end where we kind of started. So it's very telling that you just said that you personally started to lose interest in the team after they made their break to Brooklyn, right? Because you identified with them as New Jersey, and I can sort of do the same too.
A final goodbye from the Garden State. The Nets' 35-year run in New Jersey has come to an end. A new home in Brooklyn, but lots of memories in the rearview mirror. Sixers win it 105-87 over the New Jersey Nets. At halftime, they celebrated this franchise's history. New Jersey Nets basketball will be remembered, but it'll be the Brooklyn Nets from now on. one more game officially as the New Jersey Nets. No more games here in the state of New Jersey. Nets will make the move to the Barclays Center starting next season.
I want to see at least some glimmers of remembrance about what came before the Brooklyn version, having grown up and experienced that New Jersey part of their history. But only until recently has there been a bone or two thrown to the New Jersey, and even a fleeting memory of the New Jersey version. I guess the question I have in there is, maybe this is my question too. Why is it so hard for me to root for the Nets now?
So I don't know how it's for you, but for me, it has all to do with like the way sports, well, not only professional, but organized sports in general, how it's presented to people and how it's profit reliant, maybe, because when we think about Brooklyn Nets, I think about marketing, right? And they were marketed as if Jay-Z was the franchise owner, and he was marketed as a man who created the logo of the Brooklyn Nets, even though it turned out that some people were paid like $20,000 to pretend that he was the one responsible for that. So you have this sort of, well, the need to, well, identity is established over time. You can just buy identity. And I think that my main problem with the Brooklyn Nets is that, I'm sorry, my dogs.
Sounds like your friends in the background have a problem with the Brooklyn Nets too.
Yeah, they have a problem with the cat because I have like 7 dogs and 2 cats, and they mostly get along, but just time. Okay. So the problem with the Brooklyn Nets is, well, I think, so the reason what made the New Jersey Nets so great for me was that even though it wasn't like a preferred identity, it was an identity. They stood for something. When you watched the New Jersey Nets play, even though you were like hoping for the good but preparing for the bad, you knew that it would be about something. It would make you feel things, if I may return to the analogy to wrestling that I have presented earlier when we talked. So it made you feel a certain way, whereas the way the team was marketed, like when you think about Brooklyn, you think about being rugged, being tough, right? You can't buy that. It's built over time. So when you teleport, is probably the best way to put it. You teleport a team, you can't give it a new identity. It already has an identity. It already has a history, and you need to build that history through time. You can't buy that. And I just think that the Brooklyn Nets were trying to buy this new edgy identity, and it just didn't work for me. I don't know how it was for you.
No, I feel the same. And again, I'm biased, right? Because I grew up literally during this time when they became a new NBA franchise and were literally making New Jersey their identity, right? And they were received pretty quickly as such. And, you know, it is, I guess it's hard. I think I can identify with the Hartford Whalers fans, too. Very hard to sort of just rip up and start anew. And even that's probably even more of an adjustment because they went to a new city altogether and completely whitewashed it. At least the Nets name was retained. I don't know. It's I don't know if there's an answer to the question. I think certain franchises, though, do more elegantly move from one location to another and do look back on their heritage and do sort of remember sort of the roots and stuff. But, you know, I think that's also a sign of the times. To your point, money is kind of everything. It's always been a business. And yeah, I don't know how many people know that the Atlanta Braves started out way back when in Philadelphia and have been in a couple of different markets between. But, maybe that matters to people. It matters to people like me. And maybe that's just because I have an historical bent and always am curious about where things started and how they got this way. But, I can see where there's.
I'm the same way, so I can relate.
Right. But we also could be two old men yelling at the clouds, too. Right. I mean, I also don't get me wrong. I don't want to cast any aspersion against any current fan of a current team, even if the team only exists for the last couple of years. Right. Because they and the good news and the bad news is, at least for podcasts like this, they're always making more. There's always reasons to move and threaten to move and go to a new place and all that kind of stuff. And lots of stories that come along with it. But this is a team to me that, I don't know, still has a ways to go to authenticate its Brooklynness, because they're always in my mind going to be New Jersey.
Even if it will win a championship, I mean, where are they going to hold the parade? Are they going to go the same route as, I don't know, the Knicks? Definitely not. So that's kind of complicated. And when you think about the Clippers, if I just may digress, it's like the same way. They're trying to build, like, the man who owns the Clippers, I forgot his name. Oh my God, Steve Ballmer. Yeah, Steve Ballmer. Yeah, he thinks that when they win a championship, they will have an identity, right? They will establish an identity, but they already have an identity. They're the Clippers. I mean, when things are, and sort of we saw that in the playoffs, right? That when things are supposed to go bad, they will go bad anyway for you because you're the Clippers. And you will, even if you win one championship, it will be like the exception to the rule. So you need time to establish an identity. And winning, when we talked about the New Jersey Devils, winning solves that problem. But as you've said, a lot of different things factor into building an identity.
Yeah, look, I think even if the Brooklyn Nets are ultimately successful in winning an NBA championship, I honestly believe that's the perhaps most opportune time to remember where they came from, because the last time they ever won a championship in anything were their 2 years in, well, the New York Nets, right? I mean, before they came to New Jersey, they were the New York Nets, and they won the last two ABA championships, right? So you can't ignore that. It's not just the New Jersey part of the story; it's the ABA part of the story. So to me, it's almost like double the need to kind of thread through, especially since that's the last time they ever won a championship. But, maybe that's what it takes. But look, I also admire people like you and people that we've talked to over the years to keep sort of these histories alive, because these things did happen, right? The time that this team spent in New Jersey, and maybe it's not the most important thing in the world. Okay. But for me, it kind of is important because it's part of history, and you hate to see that whitewashed or forgotten because it existed. And for me, at least, and for you, for different reasons, there was an identity there, an identification with it. It was real to you. I went to games, you watched them. And you hate to see those things go away because they existed. And why not remember those things that existed? Because God forbid that, years down the road, people forget that they existed in this kind of way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. It was just perfect what you said. It captures my feelings perfectly.
All right, our long overdue focus on the great, the gutty, the gritty New Jersey version of the Nets. Cannot forget. I will squint hard always to be a fan of the Brooklyn version of the Nets as much as possible, especially when they do the throwbacks to the New Jersey jerseys or a broadcast featuring John Sterling like they did last season, calling the game like the good old days. But the New Jersey version will always have a very special place in my heart. And I thank Łukasz for bringing us down that memory lane. And again, the book that you can enjoy similar memories from is called Turnpike Team, A History of the New Jersey Nets, 1977 to 2012. It is published by our friends at McFarland, and it is available where good books are found everywhere. And we appreciate, of course, if you went to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, searching up this episode number 289. And in that episode description, you will find convenient links, plural, to this book. And you will get, of course, via Amazon in the fastest humanly available manner, Kindle version, the paperback version, whatever. And we'll get a couple of nickels or dimes of referral of, and we appreciate that. That helps support the show and keep our lights on. And that's awesome, don't you think? And let's also keep an ear out for Łukasz's upcoming book, apparently later this year. So perfect example or perfect reason to come back. Around the Vancouver version of the Grizzlies, the Vancouver Grizzlies story. So this is a person and various topics after our own hearts here, and we look forward to having Łukasz back to talk about that when that book is out. You can follow him on Facebook. You can read his reviews in the Sports in American History website. He does reviews of sports nonfiction books, and we look forward to having Łukasz back for the Grizzlies story when that is out and about later this year, hopefully, with any luck. With any luck, you will also continue to follow our doings. The best way, of course, is to bookmark our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, of course. Every stinking episode we've ever done is there and will be there. Convenient for grabbing and streaming and sending to people. If you want to give them a place to kind of just test out the wares before subscribing or following us. And you should be doing that too, subscribing or following us wherever you get podcasts. We're available wherever those are found. And of course, you can follow us on social media as well. We're on Facebook at Good Seats Still Available. We are on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. And we are on Twitter at Good Seats Still. And our email address, by all means, please, we're at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. Our thanks to Jerry Payne of Jerry Payne Audio Excellence. Happy New Year to you, sir, belatedly. And thank you, of course, for listening and dealing with our head cold and slightly scratchy voice this week. Perhaps my opportunity to try out for some DJ roles after I sign off here. Until next week, thank you for listening. More fun and frivolity coming your way next week. God willing, take care, and we'll see you.